The suitcase was already zipped when my sister-in-law walked through our front door without knocking. That's the part that still gets me, not what came after. Just that. The door swinging open like she owned it. Her eyes going straight to the luggage sitting by the couch, and that slow smile spreading across her face. "Oh good," she said. "You haven't left yet." My husband Caleb was in the kitchen pouring coffee into a travel mug. I was standing in the living room in my coat, keys already in my hand, and for a second none of us moved. It was like a photograph. The three of us frozen in a moment I hadn't been expecting and wasn't prepared for. Her name is Becca. She's 31, 2 years younger than Caleb, and she has always treated his life like it was also, somehow, hers. I should back up. Caleb and I had been planning this trip for almost 8 months. 8 months. That's not a number I'm throwing out for effect. I actually counted once, just to remind myself that this was real, that we had earned it. We'd been saving since the previous fall, quietly setting aside money from each paycheck, skipping dinners out, doing that thing where you transfer cash before you can spend it. Caleb had surprised me with the destination on my birthday in January, a long weekend in Savannah, Georgia, followed by 5 days renting a little cottage on the coast near Hilton Head. 13 days total. Just us. We don't have kids yet, but between his job in logistics and my work as a dental hygienist, our schedules almost never overlap in a way that allows for actual rest. Real rest. The kind where you don't set an alarm and you don't feel guilty about it. This trip was supposed to be that. I'd done all the planning, not because Caleb wouldn't. He would have, eventually, but because it's the thing I love to do. I made the reservations, researched the restaurants, built out a loose itinerary that still left room for nothing. I found a cottage that had a porch facing the water and a hammock between two oak trees. I had been thinking about that hammock since February. Becca knew about the trip. Of course she did. Caleb tells her everything, which used to feel like a quirk and had started to feel like something else. She'd known since March, and somewhere between March and the morning we were supposed to leave, she had gotten an idea. I didn't know about the idea until she was standing in my living room with a duffel bag over her shoulder. "I figured I'd ride with you guys as far as Savannah," she said, very casually, like this was a thing that had already been agreed upon. "My friend Danielle lives there. I've been meaning to visit forever." I looked at Caleb. He was looking at his travel mug. "Becca," he said, and I could hear in his voice that he had known. Not that she was going to show up, but that this was coming. The conversation that was supposed to have happened and didn't. "We talked about this." "I know," she said, already walking further into the living room, setting her bag down next to my suitcase like they were old friends. "But Danielle's place fell through and I thought maybe I could just come along for the Savannah part and figure the rest out from there. Figure the rest out from there." I want to be honest about who I was in that moment because it matters. I was not calm. I was the opposite of calm. I've been awake since 5:30 making sure we had everything, doing a last sweep of the house, checking that the plants were watered and the mail was held. And now I was standing in my coat with my keys and a very clear picture of 13 days suddenly changing shape into something I didn't recognize. But I've also been in enough situations with Becca to know that the worst thing I can do is react right away. She is very good at making me look like the difficult one if I'm the first to raise my voice. So I set my keys on the counter. I took off my coat, and I said, "Can I talk to Caleb for a second?" We went into the bedroom. I closed the door behind us, and Caleb was already starting. I know, I should have told her no last week. Last week, I said. He sat down on the edge of the bed. "She called me Tuesday. She said she wanted to come along just for the first part, just Savannah. I told her it wasn't a good time, and she said she'd think about it." "And you thought that meant no?" "I thought that meant she'd drop it." I sat down next to him. Outside the door, I could hear Becca moving around in the living room, which somehow made everything worse. "Caleb." I said his name the way I say it when I need him to really hear me. Not angry, just direct. "If she gets in the car with us this morning, the whole trip changes. You know that, right? It won't just be the drive. It'll be dinner and what we do and where we go. It always becomes about managing her." He nodded. He knew. That's the thing with Caleb. He is not a bad person, and he is not oblivious. He just has a very hard time with Becca specifically because she raised him in a lot of ways. Their mom passed when they were young, and Becca stepped into something that wasn't exactly a parental role, but wasn't exactly not one either. She has a way of making him feel like saying no to her is an act of cruelty. "I need you to tell her," I said. "Not me. You." He looked at me for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay." The conversation in the living room was not clean or quick. Becca did what she always does, which is pivot. When Caleb said it wasn't going to work, she shifted her posture and her tone and said she understood. She just didn't have anywhere to go now that Danielle's had fallen through. And wasn't there something we could figure out? She wasn't asking to come for the whole trip, just a few days. She'd get her own hotel room. She wouldn't impose. She said that word, impose. Like she hadn't already imposed the moment she walked through the door with a bag. Caleb held the line. "I'll give him that." He kept saying, gently but consistently, that this was our trip and it wasn't something he could change on the morning we were leaving. Becca cycled through a few different versions of the same argument, and then she went quiet in a way that I recognized and didn't like. That quiet means she's moved somewhere internal where she's cataloging the injury, where she'll sit with it until it becomes a story she tells about how her brother and his wife shut her out. "I'll figure it out," she said finally, picking up her bag. The smile was gone. "Have a good trip." She left. The door clicked shut, and Caleb and I stood in the living room, not quite looking at each other. "You okay?" I asked. "No," he said. "But let's go before I change my mind." We were 2 hours down the interstate before either of us really exhaled. I had the window cracked even though it was cool, because I needed the air moving. Caleb had the coffee. We'd put on a playlist we'd made specifically for road trips. Not curated for mood, just songs we both liked, accumulated over years. And somewhere around the second hour, I started to actually feel my shoulders drop. Savannah was everything I'd wanted it to be. We got there in the late afternoon, and the city was doing that thing it does in the spring where the light comes through the Spanish moss at an angle that makes everything look slightly unreal. We checked into the inn I'd booked on Jones Street, a narrow room with old wood floors and a window that looked out onto the square. We walked to dinner. We had oysters and a bottle of white wine, and we talked for 2 hours without once checking our phones. I think I'd forgotten what that felt like. The first 2 days went like that. We walked everywhere. We found a bookstore on Broughton Street and spent an hour in it without buying anything. We sat in Forsyth Park and watched people with their dogs. One morning, we drove out to Bonaventure Cemetery, which sounds morbid but is genuinely one of the most beautiful places I have ever been. The live oaks and the quiet and the way it feels both very old and very still. We held hands walking through it, and I thought, this is what we saved for. This feeling specifically. On the third day, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and felt something in my chest tighten. It was Caleb's dad. His dad. I'll call him my father-in-law, is not a bad man. He is a retired contractor from outside of Cleveland, 72 years old, remarried and largely uninvolved in our lives in ways that go both directions. He and Caleb talk maybe once a month. He and I have a perfectly cordial relationship that has never been particularly warm. What he and Becca have is a different kind of relationship, which I was about to learn. "Hey, sweetheart," he said when I answered, which he has never called me. "I hear you two are having a nice time down there." I put the phone on speaker so Caleb could hear. We were sitting on a bench outside a cafe, and I watched something in Caleb's face go still. "Having a great time," I said carefully. "How are you?" "Good, good. Listen, Becca mentioned she had some trouble with her plans, and I just wanted to call and say, if there's any way she could join you for even part of it, it would really mean a lot to her. She doesn't always show it, but she gets lonely." I looked at Caleb. He was looking at the ground. "I appreciate you calling," I said, "but this is a trip that Caleb and I planned for the two of us, and we're going to keep it that way." There was a pause. "Well, I understand that. I just think family means a lot to us," I said, "which is why we plan time that's just for us. I hope you understand." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Of course," he said. "Have a good trip." He hung up. I put my phone face down on the bench and did not say anything for a while. Caleb found out later, through a cousin, the way you always find out about these things, that Becca had called his dad the same morning we left and had described the situation as us abandoning her with no place to stay. The part about her friend's plans falling through was technically true. The part that was missing was that she'd had other options and had chosen not to take them because she wanted to come with us. She'd also apparently told his dad that I was the one who'd refused to let her come, that Caleb had been open to it and I'd put my foot down. Which is not accurate, but I've also stopped being surprised by the way stories get shaped in that family. We talked about it that night, on the narrow porch of our room, over mediocre wine we'd bought at a gas station because everything else was closed. Caleb was quieter than usual in the way that means he's working something out. She called my dad, he said, not like a question. She called your dad to get him to call us. Yes? He drank his wine. That's a lot of effort. It is. He drank his wine. That's a lot of effort. It is. He was quiet for another minute. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix it. I'm not asking you to fix it. I stopped, tried to find the right words. I want to be the person who comes first. Not in a demanding way, just as a fact. I want that to be clear. You are, he said. And then, after a beat, I haven't made it clear enough. That was the thing I needed to hear. Not a speech. Not a list of promises. Just that acknowledgement, plain and direct, that he saw the pattern and that it needed to change. We left Savannah on a Thursday morning and drove the rest of the way to the coast. The cottage was even better than the pictures. It was small and slightly creaky, and it smelled like cedar and old books. And the porch did face the water. And there was in fact a hammock between two oak trees that were draped in Spanish moss. I got in that hammock within 40 minutes of arriving, and I did not move for 2 hours. This is the part of the story where I wish I had something dramatic to report. I don't. The last 5 days were quiet in every sense. We cooked some of our own meals, we walked on the beach in the mornings, we read books in the afternoon, we watched the sun go down from the porch with whatever we were drinking that evening. There were no phone calls. Becca texted once, something brief and surface level, a photo of her cat, and Caleb sent back a short response and put his phone away. His dad did not call again. The cousin did not relay any more messages. On our last full day, we drove into a small town for dinner at a place we'd read about online. A low-country restaurant and a converted house with 3 tables in each room and no cell service. We had she-crab soup and fried green tomatoes and shrimp over grits, and Caleb told me a story about a work trip he'd taken years ago that I'd somehow never heard before, and I laughed until the couple at the next table looked over. Driving back to the cottage in the dark, windows down, the smell of salt air, and that particular quiet of being somewhere unfamiliar but comfortable. I thought about what had happened on the morning we left. Becca in the living room with her bag, the 2 hours down the interstate when neither of us talked, the phone call from his dad on the bench outside the cafe, and I thought, I'm glad we didn't give in. Not because I don't have empathy for Becca, I do in a complicated way that has taken years to arrive at. But because this trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a test of something, a quiet insistence that our life together is ours, that we get to decide what it looks like, that the people we love get our love, but not everything, not the parts that belong to just the two of us. We got home on a Sunday afternoon. The house was exactly as we'd left it. Plants still alive, just barely. Honestly, I may have underwatered the fern. The mail was piled on the front porch. The cat, we have a cat named Biscuit who was staying with a neighbor, came home that evening and acted offended for approximately 4 minutes before getting in Caleb's lap. Becca texted that night asking if we were home safe. Caleb said yes, we just got back, and that was it. The conversation we hadn't had with her yet, the real one about boundaries and what changes going forward, that's still coming. Caleb is working out how to have it. I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and growth for me, honestly, because my instinct has always been to step in when something needs to be said. But this is his relationship with his sister, and he needs to be the one to say it. What I know is this, he will. He's been different since we got back in small ways, more deliberate about putting his phone down during dinner, slower to answer when his family calls in the evenings. It's not dramatic, it's not a transformation, it's the beginning of a pattern shifting, which is actually the only way patterns shift. Slowly, and by choice, and because someone decided they were willing to do the work. We booked another trip while we were still in the cottage, slightly drunk on the porch, looking at options on our phones. This time we didn't tell anyone. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if we'd just let her get in the car. Not in a bitter way, more like an honest reckoning, because I think I know exactly how it would have gone. The first dinner where Becca picked the restaurant, the day she decided the itinerary needed adjusting, the slow erosion of something we'd been building toward for 8 months. And I think Caleb knows it too. That's part of why, when he finally said no that morning, it landed differently than it would have a year ago. It wasn't just a word. It was a choice he made with his whole chest. There's something I've come to believe about how things play out between people. And it's not complicated, but it took me a long time to actually trust it. The way you respond to a situation is the situation. When Becca walked through the door with her bag, the situation wasn't really about a road trip. It was about whether Caleb and I had built something that could hold its own shape under pressure. Whether we'd gotten clear enough with each other and with the people around us about what belonged to us and what didn't. For a long time, I'd been carrying the boundary setting for both of us. Caleb would hesitate, I would speak, and then I'd end up looking like the difficult one while he got to stay comfortable in the middle. That's not a sustainable arrangement, and it's not fair, and somewhere in the months leading up to that trip, I'd gotten tired enough of it to say so. That conversation, the one we'd had before we ever started packing, was the real reason Caleb was able to hold the line that morning. Not because I told him what to do, because we'd actually talked about it and he'd decided on his own that things needed to be different. That's the piece that matters most to me. Not that we went on the trip, not even that Becca didn't come, but that Caleb made a choice based on what he actually believed rather than what was easiest in the moment. That takes something. It takes being willing to feel uncomfortable, to disappoint someone you love, to sit with the guilt of it and not immediately try to make it go away. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding that particular discomfort. I understand why. It's genuinely hard, but the cost of avoiding it is that you never get to live a life that actually belongs to you. Becca called his dad because she understood, instinctively, where the soft spot was. That's what people do when they've learned that direct pressure doesn't work. They route around, and it almost worked because the call rattled us both. I felt it, that pull to just give in, to let the trip quietly reshape itself into something easier. I think what stopped me was remembering the hammock. That specific image I'd been carrying since February. The water, the oak trees, the doing nothing of it. I wasn't willing to trade that for someone else's comfort. I don't think Becca is a villain. I think she is someone who has never been told, clearly and consistently, where the line is. Some of that is on Caleb, some of it is on circumstances that were genuinely hard, losing their mom young, the roles people fall into when a family is trying to hold itself together. Understanding that doesn't mean accepting behavior that isn't okay. It just means you could draw the line without hatred, which I think is the only way to draw it and actually have it stick. We booked the next trip before we even left the cottage. Didn't tell a single person. That felt like something.